Not My Ruckus, written by Chad Musick, narrated by Ivy Tara Blair. Published by Cinnabar Moth Publishing. Esther kissed me once for free when we were both just girls. We were sitting watching the Rangers play baseball. Not the Olympics, because it was the summer of 1980, and Carter was choosing to hide in a boycott rather than fight the communists who were running it, and Gunnar went to the fridge to get a fresh bottle of beer. "Daddy," Esther called, "can we have some sandwiches?" He grunted back, and we heard his breathing punctuated by the clatter of the silverware drawer and the rattle of the jam jar. Esther swayed back and forth, making fun of how Gunnar had staggered as he walked to the kitchen. "Usually I get his beers, or Mom does, but your company." She winked at me. I wasn't allowed at Esther's house often, even though we should have been best friends all along. We were both 14, we lived across the street from each other, and we would go to high school together the next year, just like we'd always gone to school together. But her family wasn't our kind of people. On the day Esther kissed me, though, Mama had a vision of her and Esther's mom going shopping together. When Mama had a vision, you didn't stand in the way, and so she'd drop me off and taken Esther's mom in the big car to go shopping. Gunnar came back with a paper plate of peanut butter and strawberry jam sandwiches for us, and a pair of beers for himself. He eased back down into his lounger with the creak of springs and a scritch of leather on denim, and opened a beer. He let it dangle from his fingers, and it wasn't long before he was snoring. Esther crept up on him and eased the bottle from him. She held it out for me to drink. This was one of the reasons they weren't our kind of people, and I shook my head no at her. "I'll scream," she whispered, and held it out again. "It's gross. He already drank off it." Esther pushed her finger into the neck of the bottle and wiped it, just a little pop of sound when her finger came out, then wiped the outside of the top. She made me take the bottle. I drank some, of course I did. Not much, just a swallow so she wouldn't scream, and then I gave it back to her. She finished the bottle and then laid it down beneath Gunnar's fingertips. There hadn't been much left anyway, I told myself. We sat on the floor in the Texas summer heat and leaned our backs against the new couch. The plastic on the seats got sticky and uncomfortable when the sun shone on it, but the unglazed terracotta floor was cool, and her hand was warm when she put it in mine. She was swaying again, and when she swayed my way, her head rested on my shoulder and stayed there. "Esther," I told her. She looked up. "We're best friends now?" She nodded. Good. It was good to have a friend, even if next year she didn't join me in softball and running and volleyball and all the other sports I'd been denied in junior high because they were only intramurals. I'd still have a friend. Frank didn't let me play with him anymore because he was older and it wasn't cool to have your little sister around, especially if she was better at baseball than you. He could get the bat on the ball sometimes, smash it high in the air with the powerful arms that he'd once used to hoist me on his wide shoulders, but he lacked control. Just about every hit was a foul or a pop fly. Even when he hit it well, he was never ready to run. I've always been ready to run. Esther didn't care about baseball, even if she'd watch it on the TV with me. At school, I'd used to watch her when she double-dutched with the other girls, who called me boy like it was a curse word and stopped their ropes whenever I came around. "I have a secret," she said without lifting her head. "I want to tell it to you." "Tell me," I breathed. The beer in me was making my tongue fuzzy and my head slippery, like the devil had kissed my brain just a little. She took my hand, all sweaty from holding hers, and put it against her heart, then put her hand against my heart. "Okay, but you have to close your eyes so your heart can hear it too." I closed them, and my hand pressed harder against her as she leaned forward, pressing me down almost to the floor, and I turned my head to hear her secret. But she moved her hand from my heart, turned my head back to her, and I felt her lips against mine. Baby Jesus was crying. I knew baby Jesus was crying. I could feel him shaking Esther, and I wanted to push her away, but My hand on her heart said she was scared, and I didn't want to lose my friend, so new and so only. I felt wet on my cheek, but her lips still unmoving on my lips. I opened my eyes and hers were flooded, her tears running down her face and then my cheeks, not her tongue at all. I reached out and brushed her tears with the back of my hand, the way Mama did when I cried, and told her it would be all right the way I wished Mama would when I cried. I stroked her long dark hair and wished it were mine. That's the secret. She was having trouble controlling her breathing, and soon she started hiccuping great gallops of surprise. The secret is you have some beer and then you kiss, but you can't ever tell anyone or they'll take me away. We lay on the floor, watching the ceiling fan make its lazy, inadequate rotations. Her hiccups got louder, and I started pretending to hiccup just to make her laugh. The phone rang, and we looked up to see whether Gunnar was going to wake up. I'm not allowed to answer the phone, Esther told me. We listened, it rang, and when it had rung 10 times, we decided we better wake Gunnar. Esther got up and shook her dad. Daddy, phone. Gunnar snorted himself awake and trundled to the phone. Hello, who's this? His voice was surly, suspicious. He paused to listen to the caller. Of course she's still here. But, he said, and slumped to the floor, rolling down the wall like perfect cooked spaghetti, still holding the receiver. You must be wrong. We'll be there. He fumbled with the black Bakelite receiver, not looking at the cradle, and finally slammed it down hard enough to make its bell ring again, ran his fingers through his thinning hair, wiped the sweat on his grubby shirt, and got his keys from the counter. Get in the car, girls, he told us. We've got to go now. I didn't want to go, didn't want to ride with him, not even when he said my mom had been in an accident. Papa had warned me the bad ones would say this, and then snatch you up and torture and kill you. But this was Esther, and I knew her, so I got in the car and we went to the hospital. Because Mama had been in an accident, which meant Esther's mom had too. On the way to the hospital, Gunnar drove at exactly the speed limit, even before he saw me checking. I sat in the back seat with Esther and traced the pattern of cracks in the vinyl. The feel of the foam padding was bad against my fingertips, but even so I counted the cracks, cataloged their lengths by how many times they turned. Esther was looking miserable, like she might be car sick, and she lay down on the seat and took one of my hands. I could see Gunnar watching us in the rearview mirror, his piggy little eyes glaring at me, or maybe squinting against the harsh sunlight which was coming straight through the windshield as the sun set. Esther scooted up and put her head on my lap, and I was stroking her beautiful hair when Gunnar slammed on the brakes and the car lurched to a stop on the side of the road, the engine shuddering in protest. Esther tumbled into the space between the front and back seats. He got out of the car, whipped his door shut with one hand, and yanked the back door open. Esther screamed when he grabbed her by the foot, pulled her hard enough that her sandal came off, and she was dragged across the carpet on the floor and then thump-thump out the door. He slammed the door, and I saw his hand draw back the way Mama's did when the devil took me and he gave her Jesus love right in the face, right there in the street. Esther stood back up and got into the passenger side of the front. Mama would say it must have hurt Gunnar something fierce because I could see the handprint on Esther's face, the rug burns on her legs when she put her feet up on the dash, and it always hurts the parents worse. Gunnar got in the driver's seat and shut the door. He looked at me in the rearview mirror, waited until he knew I was looking. I'm sorry, darling, truly. He didn't look sorry much. It's not your fault she thinks she's a dyke, but you're just confusing her. He started the car again and pulled back into traffic like nothing had happened, even though his breathing didn't calm down for a couple blocks. Esther didn't say anything the rest of the way, and nobody else did either. When we got to the hospital, we all got out of the car. Before she shut the door, Esther leaned in and carefully vomited in the footwell.